Sharm Al Sheikh, the sidewalk vendors selling colorful scarves, leather necklaces, and pharaonic refrigerator magnets would be the first to lose their livelihoods, said Ishak Haleem, a grocery store owner here. The British tourists making impulse buys had started to vanish after the crash of a Russian charter jet 10 days ago prompted a number of countries to suspend flights to Sharm Al Sheikh over fears the plane had been brought down by a bomb. Then the Russians disappeared, Haleem said, depriving the hotels, restaurants, stores, and souvenir vendors of the two nationalities that make up the overwhelming majority of visitors to this idyllic point on the Sinai Peninsula. Yet as a few of the remaining beachgoers bought cigarettes or beer at his store, Haleem said he was confident the planes would return soon enough, with the tourists, although not quickly enough to save the little souvenir stalls. There was pain coming, to be sure, but Sharm is not dying, he said. 10 days after the plane crash, which killed 224 people, many business owners here were steeling themselves for short-term losses but shrugging off the cataclysmic predictions of the resort's demise. Part of it seemed to be conditioning, after years of surviving sudden and seemingly disastrous shocks including political turmoil, killer sharks, and deadly militant attacks. But mostly, people seemed to view Sharm Al Sheikh's success as inexorable, vulnerable to setbacks, maybe, but in the end, assured by the Red Sea's warmth and the perpetual sun. The resort had been one of the few places in Egypt that survived the collapse of tourism that began with the uprising against President Hosni Mubarak in 2011 and left its most popular attractions, like Luxor and the pyramids, deserted. And it was not the worst place to wait out a crisis. Luxor does not have the sea, Haleem said. In reality, though, the uncertainty may last longer than most people here expect or hope. On Tuesday, a senior Russian official said it could take at least several months for Russian flights to resume. The official, Sergei B. Ivanov, President Vladimir Putin's chief of staff, said the investigation into the cause of the crash would take time as the scattered remains of the Airbus A321-200 were reassembled. Theories that someone, perhaps an airport worker, spirited a bomb aboard the plane have focused scrutiny on lax safeguards at Egypt's airports. Ivanov said that it is impossible to radically change the systems of security, protection, and control at an airport in a week or even a month. Egyptian officials, blindsided by the sudden cancellations of flights, complained that allies like Britain and the United States had not shared intelligence about the crash. Many of Egypt's news media echoed the anger and went further, sketching out a vast conspiracy to deprive the country of tourists. The doors of hell were opened before us, said a television host, Kari Ramadan, on his program as he expressed his bafflement that more than half a dozen countries had simply stopped flying to Egypt after what was possibly the country's worst militant attack. The criticisms in Sharm Al Sheikh were more sober, in a place that residents like to boast feels like a different country from Egypt. People said they were offended at what seemed like a hasty decision to halt the flights and asserted that many of their customers were being dragged home against their will. Privately, however, others said they had nothing to gain if the Egyptian government and newspapers started picking fights with countries that sent tourists here. There were bigger worries, including finding ways to survive as the resorts emptied out and the streets in Nama Bay, which on the busiest nights are crammed with people spilling out of its cafes, grew unnervingly calm. The planes kept arriving, some bringing new tourists, but they were more likely to be whisking people away. Local people were becoming frustrated and alarmed, said Tamer Karbodli, who sits on the board of the company that owns the Pasha nightclub and other businesses. There is no source of income in the area except the tourists, and everyone, hotel chains but also the car mechanics and lumberyards, depended on them. Shops would close, and hotels would be forced to furlough or lay off employees. He seemed confident that other tourists, from Arab countries, or maybe Poland, would replace the Russians and the British. Backup is coming. That's what the promises are, Karbodli said, finding some hope in a line of young people nearby waiting to get into the club. Hesham Gabr, who founded the Camel Dive Club and Hotel in 1986, one of Sharm Al Sheikh's pioneering businesses, said people would simply have to wait out the inevitable negotiations between Egypt and European countries, led by Britain, insisting on better safety measures at the airport. Resort workers had become accustomed to hardship, after militant attacks in 2005, and the 2011 uprising, which left hotel occupancy rates hovering at 50 to 60%. Gabor said he was in a better position than most, having developed relationships over the years with clients, and able to assure them that alarming headlines rarely reflected reality in Sharm Al Shaikh. But his business would take a hit as well. 20% of his customers were people who walked in while visiting the resort. From his perspective, a temporary loss of tourists was not all bad news. It could slow down stampeding development, ease strains on the environment, and allow time for the resort to be improved. Yet that was little comfort to most. "People are getting tired," he said. "We tell each other we have the sun, the clean air, the beautiful sea. We can spend our time waiting, much better than anyone else.